Hello, my name is Synymata, and this is a breakdown of my song When We're Together with Monika Santucci. So When We're Together is a really interesting track because the original demo that I had for Monika, this is going back now almost 2 to 3 years, is completely different from what the final song is. The initial demo that she wrote, once I had chopped it up, ultimately inspired the chorus that we have in the final track. That's something that's really interesting to mention for a lot of producers is whenever you get demos back from people, instead of just being like yay or nay on it, if you can go through it and find the things that you like and chop them together, splice them, contort them, stretch them, whatever. A lot of times that is all you really need to kind of find the right direction for a track and just really lock in with someone that you're working with. That was absolutely the case with this track because the original chorus, I would say, was about half the length of what's in here. But what I did was I spaced it out and had all this extra space, which naturally I would argue most songwriters wouldn't decide to leave so much empty space in the chorus. But for myself, I love space and I love writing around space and vocals because it kind of lets you have like a nice, really lush backdrop to it. And you can just kind of bask in whatever it is that you're hearing on the track. But again, that direction that we arrived at really wouldn't have come together unless I had done that initial Frankensteining and kind of inspiring that direction. For this breakdown, I want to do things a little bit differently. I want to start with the production and just kind of go over all the pieces that make up the song. A lot of it will probably look pretty familiar to my other breakdowns that I've done. But then I want to come back to the writing and really dive into the chords and all the multiple melodies that make up this track. Because I think for this song, it stands really unique from all the other tracks because of how many melody layers there are in this track. So I just want to put some emphasis on that, but let's come back to that after we break down some of the production first. So first, let's just take a look at the intro and all the layers that are going on here.
I lost myself in your arms. All the times I thought that I was lonely, hoping in the dark I found my...
So it's kind of the same thing for the entire verse and then the pre-chorus. Piano. Good old noir. Same thing with the color and tonal shift tilts. This is my sonar thing that I love so much. That's the granulizer version of it with the delay and reverb in parallel. And then we have some contact going on here. Again, this is definitely from just diving through contact libraries and just finding anything that sounds cool. We got some serum. Really simple, just sine plucks. Yep, ethereal earth. And then we have another, I'm gonna imagine, yep, same thing. Just so these are the same preset. They're just stacked on octaves, just to give it a really nice mid body and then a high end to it. So the effect is that you have a nice piano with a lot of this kind of ethereal high end pads coming in, and then the bass. This is very similar to Fall Back to You, where I have the like a high pass with a lot of resonance coming in, which gives like the perception of like a really large bass, but there's really no sub playing. And then in this one, I have a string bass layer just to kind of add more voices to this bass. So again, this verse and pre-chorus is really simple. It's really just pads with the piano and some nice like big girthy bass. But then getting into the chorus, this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting.
'Cause you bring me back to life.
More piano. And that's layered with this swelly pad thing. Yep, and this is just, we have some basic serum with some automation on the cutoff on here. Same thing with this layer. You might notice a lot of this is like really fifth sounding. Yeah. And that's intentional because a lot of the actual chord information is in the piano, but this is just adding more movement and width to this section of the song. And then there's these build melodies that come in behind the vocal. So this is a layered octave melody here. This is just probably just noir. Yep. Noir with some EQing and then transient shaper on this. just to back off the each attack on every note that's played. So the high, same idea. KHS. And there's also a sine layer here. And there's another sine layer here as well. This is stacked octaves. And this is all running into its own echo and reverb on this. And then this is similar to that intro kind of the Moog sound you were hearing. Same recordings, and I just took them and just kind of chopped them up into its own little melody here as well. And then in the build, yeah, so this is just a Serum preset for the build section, and then we have Maverick here, and then this sound here, more contact, lo-fi, and that's layered with just a basic square wave from Serum, and then this little swelly thing at the end. Yeah, just kind of swelling in right at the end there. And this is all just baked into the LFO on here, just kind of opening up that filter. And then there's some more eerie stuff. Yeah. And then so that sonar stuff again. Just some sampled effects stuff here. Some resampled tails, a drone, more of that sonar sound. And then again, I'm just kind of grazing over all this because it's pretty similar to the Die Young and Fall Back to You breakdowns, but just to hear the space by itself. Yeah, sine bass, and just a couple layers here. Higher voice. That's just giving like the high-end buzz on here. A lot of OTT. This is definitely high passed. And then its image at the end. And then it's just being slanted to a maximizer. And then also there is this noise layer here. But yeah, kind of like my standard where it's just a lot of voices on the bass, a lot of buzz on the high end from noises and stuff like that. And I have these drop leads. Power lead, top lead. Yep, again, just more Serum on a square pad. And then there's this drop counter melody that comes in here. And this is actually basically the same thing that you hear. Yeah, build counter melody, same layers, piano, lo-fi, Serum, piano, lo-fi, Serum, but it may be a little bit different processing just because it's in the drop. It's probably jacked up there in volume. And then in the drop, you do hear a lot of this vocal stuff, this very much like Irrelevant. It's kind of the same exact thing where it's just time is irrelevant, 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 irrelevant. And then here it's when we're together, together. Like it's kind of the same thing where it's for a drop that it's very simplistic in kind of the main sound that you're hearing. So having this vocal add to that and just kind of add more just things happening, it's just really nice to have that here. So again, the production, again, I wanted to just graze over it because a lot of this is, I've already shown this in the Fall Back to You and the Die Young breakdowns. Now I want to take a look at the writing of this song because I think there's a lot of really interesting things to point out that I think would help a lot of people with their own songwriting. So let's take a look at these chords for just the intro on the piano. This song is in A minor. The progression is basically just 6, 7, 8, 5, and just repeated. And at the very end, though, it is held out on the root chord there. But what gets really interesting is going into the chorus. And like I mentioned before, the chorus was the first thing that we had as an anchor that we built around. Because again, I took her vocal and I chopped it up and kind of created this really spacious chorus. But when I did that, I also wrote out unique chords to this chorus. So just to play that together.
'Cause you bring me back to life. 'Cause you take me to new heights. 'Cause you make me feel stronger. And I hope that we make it when we're together.
Yeah, that progression is really interesting. Just simply because, as you can kind of see, it's kind of just evolving back and forth between this F chord and then this D chord with a couple pickups in between. But some of these pickups are just unique to the section completely. You know, we first start with the root chord and then we go to this F chord here. But as you can see, the voicings on these chords are not your standard triads. And I remember when I was writing this section out, the voicing really mattered in terms of what I was trying to do here. And that's something that I would always tell producers is your chords should be triads unless you specifically are trying to do something a little bit different or more complex than just basic triads. So like, as you can see in like the build section, these are the same chords as the intro. These are just your standard triads where I typically like to voice the root and then it's a fifth, and then your major or minor third is an octave up from there. But these chords are voiced not even anything like that. We have some octaves here, and some of these chords are missing a couple notes and stuff. So like this chord right here, this is like a D minor seventh with a note removed because there's no F. But then you have the stacked Ds. And again, this is an intentional decision. Having the F in there didn't sound right when I was doing it. So these voicings on these chords are very particular to this vocal right here. And that's okay though. And that's the thing I always tell producers is, you know, if you're going to do writing that deviates from just standard triads, you really should understand what you're doing and be in control of that. That's not a decision that you should be making just because it sounded good as you did it. It's something that you should like check and see like, oh, like what if it was just a basic just D minor chord there instead? But in this case, having it be that D minor 7 with the note removed really was like the correct decision against the vocal. And then kind of going from there, we have this E chord, pretty basic, and then it goes, yeah. And this is just playing a fifth here.
You make me feel stronger. I hope that we make it.
And my point is with this, it's kind of like it's a 90% of the time you shouldn't do something like this because probably the basic chords are probably all you really need for a section, but there's that 10% of the time where actually voicing things in this way is what sounds correct to you. And so that chord progression is played against obviously the vocal, which has a lot of space in it, but that's also then played against two counter melodies as well. So if I solo these all together.
Bring back to life. 'Cause you take me to new heights. 'Cause you make me feel stronger. And I hope that we make it when we're together.
I will say right there is one of my many shticks is having these complementary melodies, or more musically speaking, maybe like counter melodies or counterpoints. You could also maybe describe this as a hocket when you have a melody that's passed between multiple sounds. However you want to describe it, but this is like, I love to do this kind of thing where I have multiple melodies playing at the same time. So it's not just a vocal and a pad or a piano. It's a vocal and then background melodies that come in and out, and especially in this case, to fill the space around the vocal. The biggest thing I say that I tell people whenever you're writing counter melodies, each melody against another melody should sound fine and there shouldn't be any clashes. Unless you're specifically going for dissonance, then that's okay. But usually everything paired off should sound good. So like that top piano melody against the vocal.
Back to life, me to new heights, 'cause you make me feel stronger, and I hope that we make it.
It's like there's no clashes there, and those melodies are very complementary. And then if we compare that to this lower counter melody, playing this against the vocal now.
'Cause you bring me back to life, 'cause you take me to new heights, 'cause you make me feel strong.
So you kind of get the idea. Like nothing is clashing against each other. And that to me, I think is a good starting point when writing counter melodies, is that nothing is clashing. Everything sounds like it's existing in its own space and it's all kind of unified towards building up whatever kind of soundscape you're going for. And beyond that, though, like how to kind of identify what can sound cool and stuff, a lot of times just kind of fiddling around on a piano as you're, playing with the section is a really good place to start, because if you're trying to write a melody from scratch in MIDI, it can be really difficult to kind of know even where to begin with that. So soloing a vocal against piano chords and then just fiddling around on the side is a really good place to start with that. And then from there, so the build and the drop have a lot of the same melody work going on, same bass line, and a lot of the sounds that you hear in the build are carried over into the drop on similar instruments. This drop is also really unique to me because the lead melody, it's kind of at certain points against the bass, it's playing in unison, and at other points it's just playing like a seventh. So like here on that second note, that's just an octave, and then we have a fifth playing here, which is just an A against the D. And then there we have basically stepping fifths, which again, from music theory, having fifths just kind of stepping along in the same direction never really sounds good. But it works in this song because of the counter melodies. The counter melodies are doing a lot of the heavy lifting to make this drop sound really full. All right, so then coming out of the drop, this is where things get a little interesting, because if you have a chorus playing against a certain set of chords, it's good to repeat that progression against the chorus whenever it's played in a track. But for when we're together, I don't do that. So the progression that you hear is the same progression as the first half of the drop, but it is the chorus playing against a different set of chords here.
'Cause you bring me back to life, 'cause you take me to new heights, 'cause you make me feel stronger,
Compared to the initial chorus.
'cause you bring me back to life, 'cause you take me to new heights.
In a lot of cases, when I kind of hit this kind of like a crossroad where I'm like, oh, well, I want this progression in this section, but I want this other progression in this section against the same vocal, I tend to think along the lines of, well, maybe one of the progressions is better than the other. But in the case of When We're Together, I couldn't decide because there were strengths and weaknesses to this. I remember for a while I was debating just repeating the same chords as the initial chorus section in the post-drop section, but just because of the movement of the bass line, it just didn't sound right. But I wanted to maintain some familiarity between the sections, and that's why the melodies are similar, but are not exactly the same. And that was just due to the chord changes and the differences and just how certain chords were resolving at certain points, but these melodies were written against this chord progression versus in that post drop section, they were written against the 6, 7, 8, 5 progression. So if we listen to this by itself, yeah. And then you compare that to here. Those sections, in terms of writing, they feel the same, but they're not the same. And that was just, again, due to having a post drop with such like a moving bass line. It just didn't feel right. So reusing the same progression as the first half of the drop made the most sense. So the biggest thing that I would hope producers take away from this is maybe there's rules that you impose on yourself or you hear from other producers, but rules are meant to be broken. And I'm definitely a producer that has a lot of rules that I set up for myself. But in this case, it was an intentional decision to break those rules. But the biggest thing is maintaining an understanding of what I'm doing or like why I'm doing that is really important, just so that your song doesn't start to feel like a clusterfuck. And that can lead to a very kind of mismatch of a track. But again, remaining in control of that is really critical when you kind of deviate from those rules that you might impose on yourself. So yeah, I really think that's the end of the breakdown for When We're Together. So I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. Hope you guys learned something from it, and I'll see you in the next one.